Well, folks, all the celebrities are out and they are showing their rage, their absolute rage, not at the Iranian government mowing people down in the streets, at ICE. Plus, we'll get to the latest in Iran, and President Trump goes after Jerome Powell with the law. First, way back on October 28th, we announced Matt Fradd was joining the Daily Wire Plus lineup. Today, that announcement becomes reality as Pints with Aquinas makes its official Daily Wire Plus debut. This is not a new show. Pints with Aquinas has built a deeply loyal audience because these conversations are thoughtful, meaningful, and worth sitting with. Viewers make time for them. They share them. They come back week after week. That's why Matt Fradd joined us here at Daily Wire Plus. The mission stays the same. Now the show has the reach and the support to grow even further. A brand new episode of Pints with Aquinas is streaming right now with new episodes every Monday at Daily Wire Plus. So, as epic things of cataclysmic proportions are happening over in Iran, apparently hundreds of protesters being shot to death at a minimum, could be all the way up to 10,000, according to certain eyewitnesses reporting to the BBC. The folks in Hollywood have their priorities straight. So last night was the Golden Globes, and it was an opportunity for members of the Hollywood contingent to, of course, prize their pseudo-morality over everyone else's. It was time for them to make a stand. After all, they've made stands on issues ranging from Tibet back in the 90s, which they conveniently have now forgotten all about, to the lack of a genocide in the Gaza Strip. Remember that just last year, a bunch of Hollywood celebrities were prancing around like fools, claiming that a genocide that was not happening was, in fact, happening, and criticizing the state of Israel for defending its own existence. Well, this year they have a different cause because, hey, new day, new cause. Now, is that cause the cause of the Iranian people who are out in the streets risking their own deaths to defy the mullahs? These people in Iran, many of them are secular. Many of them are people who are westernized in their attitudes toward the state. Are those the people toward whom Hollywood directs all of its sympathies? Are they sparing a moment for those people? Of course not. Of course not. Last night, Hollywood put on a show at the Golden Globes, and everything was about ICE. It was all about ICE and about LGBTQ and about Barry Weiss taking over CBS, because you see, these are the real threats. These are the real threats. According to the people in Hollywood, the things that you should have your eyes focused on, like a laser beam, are the predations of immigrations and customs enforcement enforcing the law with regard to illegal immigration and deporting people for welfare fraud. You should have your eyes focused like a laser beam on Barry Weiss taking over CBS News and perverting it from its long history of not reporting the news properly. You should be focused like a laser beam on the terrible predations that affect LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign people all over the United States, because they have to take refuge at places like the Golden Globes. I mean, it is an act of bravery to stand up at the Golden Globes and virtue signal on behalf of the LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign. These are the things that matter most, according to Hollywood. So last night, a bunch of celebs showed up. And again, they decided that the chief things you need to worry about as an American, the thing that they are focused on as the moral guideposts, the lodestars of our civilization, those things are ICE, LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign, and Barry Weiss. So Nikki Glaser began the evening. She was the hostess of the Golden Globes. And she began the evening by going after the most deserving target. Now, the thing that requires her absolute rage, that thing is Barry Weiss and CBS News.
And the award for most editing goes to CBS News. Yes. CBS News, America's newest place to see BS News.
It's a pun because it's like CBS. Man, she needs some new writers. Not as good as her last Golden Globes performance. Meanwhile, Mark Ruffalo, who for some reason, I got to say, Mark Ruffalo, overrated. Has Mark Ruffalo turned in a performance where he wasn't playing Mark Ruffalo in the last 20 years? He's just always Mark Ruffalo. So Mark Ruffalo shows up and he says, it's hard to pretend anymore that we don't live in a dictatorship, he says. Wearing a tux at the Golden Globes, being paid millions of dollars to play the same character in Task that he has played in every other miniseries and movie for the last 2 decades.
I got to be honest with you. I'm not feeling so great. We have a woman, Renee Good, was murdered in our streets of America today, and we got literally stormtroopers running around terrorizing. And as much as I love all this, I don't know if I can pretend like this crazy stuff isn't happening. We have a president who says the laws of the world don't apply to him, and we could rely on his morality, but he has no morality. So where does that leave us? Where does that leave the world? So I love these people. I love being here. I love you. But I also can't. It's so hard to pretend anymore. This is crazy what's happening.
It's hard for him to pretend. Being an actor, it's very, very difficult for him to pretend. I mean, this is a person who, again, spent the last 2 years basically standing on behalf of terrorist groups in the Middle East, but it's very hard to pretend that there aren't stormtroopers wandering the street. You know what's cool about being able to say that sort of thing? That there aren't stormtroopers wandering the streets. Because, throughout history, when there were stormtroopers wandering the streets, what celebrities didn't get to do? Get on camera and talk about how there were stormtroopers wandering. In fact, there are many places on Earth where the stormtroopers do wander the streets. For example, in Iran, where there are, in fact, stormtroopers shooting people in the head for protesting. Does Mark Ruffalo have a word for them? No. He has a little pin that says, be good, be good. Be presumably like Renee Good, a reference to the woman who was shot by an ICE agent after directing her car to bump one of those ICE agents at the very least, after obstructing traffic for 3 full minutes, trying to stop ICE from doing its job. But it is incredible to me how we just have to rewrite the histories. And it happens on all sides, but in this particular case from the left, you have to rewrite a history that we watched happen in front of us 5 days ago, 4 days ago. And we've all seen the tape. Renee Good was there to obstruct ICE enforcement action. That is a federal crime. She did so. She did so for a very long period of time. In fact, here is Renee Good. This is Renee Good parked for 3 full minutes, perpendicularly to traffic, attempting to block ICE from doing its job. People are parked. Look, she's dancing in her car as she honks. Right? ICE is trying to get through. She is parked in order to obstruct them. You can see the line of cars, and she's just parked that way. And this is, her backing up. She's being approached by agents. Here she is. Right? There she is, just pulling up. She's waving through people who are not cops, but then she is stopped, and then this tape cuts off just before the shooting happens. We also, by the way, have footage of Renee Good before her death taunting the feds. She thought it was fun and games, okay? That is pretty clearly the truth from the tape. She thought that what was happening was not serious business, that obstructing federal law enforcement came without any sort of real consequence, and then when they approached her, presumably to detain or arrest her, that is when she took off with the car. And again, that is not speaking to her intent as to whether she wanted to hit the officer or not. But the fact is that when you resist federal law enforcement and your car hits an agent, bad things happen. I'm just pointing this out because wearing pins that say be good as though she was walking down the street doing nothing and then she was shot by federal enforcement agents, that is not true. You don't have to do a revisionist history to say this is a tragedy, but you should actually spell out the facts of the case. You can hear an officer get out of his car, walks over with his phone, walks around the front of the car. She's smiling in the car, by the way.
I'm not mad at you. Show your face. I'm not mad at you. That's okay. We don't change our plates every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later. That's fine.
That is Renee Good's wife.
You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
Out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car. Whoa.
Okay, and so that is the footage of the shooting. But as you can see, up until the moment that Renee Good tries to drive away, there is no perception that she's doing anything wrong. I mean, she's taunting the police officers at the time. So again, that doesn't mean that she was trying to kill the police officer. I don't know what she was trying to do. Did the officer have a reasonable supposition that he was under attack by the car? I mean, it's going to be hard after that footage to deny that he had at least an objectively reasonable suspicion that she was attempting to direct the car into him, given her absolute disdain for law enforcement as she was violating federal law at the time. The only reason that this is important in the context of the Golden Globes is if you're going to wear pins saying be good, as though Renee Good, again, was just walking down the street and was shot. And we've seen this so many times with the virtue signaling left. We've seen it so many times, ranging from Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, where they lied and they said that he was shot in the back or that he was shot while he was holding his hands up. We've seen it so many times to, by the way, George Floyd claiming that there was no prior medical issue with George Floyd before he was taken out and put on the ground. We've gone in detail through the tape of George Floyd, what actually happened, what happened with Officer Derek Chauvin and all the rest. The desperate desire and need to create a full-on black and white narrative with regard to what are very tragic and very often shaded incidents is truly an astonishing thing. And that's what Hollywood does best, but they always seem to pick the side that opposes law enforcement, opposes the West as a general rule. All right, coming up, more from our most esteemed moral critics over at the Golden Globes. First, this episode is sponsored by Preborn Ministries. During this Sanctity of Life month, we remember the over 67 million babies whose lives have been lost to abortion since Roe versus Wade. Here's what many people don't realize. Since Roe was overturned, the situation has actually gotten a lot more complicated. Today, the abortion pill makes up more than 60% of all abortions, which means it's accessible around the clock. But there's hope in all of this. Preborn has saved over 400,000 babies from abortion. Right now, they're saving more than 200 babies every single day. Here's how it works. When a woman who's considering abortion hears her baby's heartbeat and sees that ultrasound image, she's twice as likely to choose life. For just $28, about what you'd spend on dinner, you can sponsor one ultrasound and give a mom the chance to meet her baby for the very first time. Every dollar you give goes directly toward saving lives. And moms making these decisions, that is the most important thing in life. Really the most important thing. And here's how you can help. Dial pound 250, say keyword baby. That's pound 250, keyword baby. Or you can donate securely online at preborn.com/Ben. Again, that's preborn.com/Ben, preborn.com/Ben, or dial pound 250 and use keyword baby. Here's Mark Ruffalo continuing to rant while wearing the Renee Good pin.
Mark, what's the pin?
It's for Renee Nicole Good, who was murdered. We have a vice president who's lying about what's happening. We have we're in the middle of a war with Venezuela that we illegally invaded. He's telling the world that international law doesn't matter to him. The only thing that matters to him is his own morality. But the guy is a convicted felon or convicted. He's the worst human being. If we're relying on this guy's morality for the most powerful country in the world, then we're all in a lot of trouble. So this is for her. This is for the people in the United States who are terrorized and scared today. I know I'm one of them. I love this country, and what I'm seeing here happening is not America. It's just not.
Mark, why do you feel that this platform is still useful to spread a message like this?
Listen, I want to pretend like this is, I want to be here to celebrate, and I am here to celebrate, and I'm proud to have a Golden Globe nomination. But also, this is not normal anymore.
This is not normal. By the way, in that little speech right there, he slandered the president of the United States as a pedophile, called him the worst person in the world for, among other things, extraditing Nicolas Maduro, a communist dictator responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of people and the exile of literally millions of people. And that, to Mark Ruffalo, is a big moral problem. Donald Trump is the big moral problem. Again, not a word to spare for the millions marching in the streets in Iran right now, thousands of whom are getting mowed down by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. Ariana Grande also showed up wearing her Ice Out pin. This is the new hot thing in Hollywood, your Ice Out pin. And frankly, any amount of weight added to her garment puts her at risk of falling over, Ariana Grande. And Jean Smart also wore a Be Good pin. This is like the popular accoutrement of the night. She was wearing her pin. She also told the New York Post, quote, "I'm here speaking as a citizen and a mom, and I hope people understand that." And then she said, "I don't think my opinion matters more than anybody's. That's not what I'm doing. I feel like if you feel strongly about something and you have a chance to share your feelings or encourage people or cheer somebody on, you should do it." Well, I have a feeling that that same feeling is not extended at the Golden Globes generally to people who might feel the opposite. I don't know. Call me crazy. So this is where Hollywood puts its priorities. Wanda Sykes, of course, showed up to talk about LGBTQ minus divided by sign. Here was Wanda Sykes at the Golden Globes.
You know there's some people pissed off that a queer black woman is up here doing the job of two mediocre white guys.
No one cares. And also, you're not good at this. I mean, both those things I mean, literally no one cares. The fact you have to keep saying it over and over shows that no one cares. But this is where Hollywood puts its priorities. The reason I say this is because there are people on Earth. What a spoiled country we are. Truly a spoiled country. There are people on Earth who are literally putting their lives at risk, their bodies on the line for their own freedom. And Hollywood has nothing to say to them. Nothing. Literally nothing. Dead silence. Are you seeing the protests on campuses in favor of the Iranian people right now? Have you seen a single protest? You have not. Have you seen a single mass protest by all of these international law-loving, human rights-adoring left-wingers, the Zoran Mamdani wing of the Democratic Party, in favor of the protesters in Iran who simply want their horrifying theocratic regime gone? Have you seen a single comment, in fact, from Democrats beyond these sort of thoughts and prayers? You have not. Have you seen protests in the streets? You have not. Have you seen calls for material aid? You have not. Right? It's all just sad sack nonsense. It truly is, because there are people in the world who are doing something courageous and incredible right now. According to certain eyewitnesses to the BBC, the number of people killed is well into the thousands at this point. Again, we are now in day 14 of the protests that have been going on around Iran. Millions of people in the streets. According to the Washington Post, at least hundreds of demonstrators have been killed in Iran, according to rights groups on Sunday, as reports of a dramatic escalation in the use of deadly force by security forces began to break through a communications blackout imposed by authorities struggling to contain some of the largest protests since the Islamic Republic was founded in 1979. Trump administration national security officials were preparing to discuss options, including possible military strikes, a senior U.S. official told the Washington Post. At the very least, if the United States is considering that, we ought to be moving aircraft carriers into the region. We have not so far mobilized resources into the region. Now, obviously, we have some resources at air bases in the Middle East, but if you were going to have a supported operation, or if you wanted to threaten one, presumably you should at least put those pieces on the chessboard in place at this point. The Center for Human Rights in Iran, based in New York, said it had received eyewitness accounts and credible reports that hundreds of protesters have been killed since the government shut down access to the internet on Thursday night. A senior Western official briefed on the matter said hundreds were killed in 48 hours of protests. It's hard to gather credible casualty figures, apparently, because the protests are so widespread. According to the Washington Post, the Trump administration is considering military options in response to the crackdown. Officials across the key national security agencies were scheduled to brief President Trump early this week. President Trump himself suggested in a press gaggle on Air Force One that Iran seems to be killing the protesters. He has said that if they start shooting the protesters, that's a red line for him. President Trump, unlike Barack Obama, unlike Joe Biden, is not one to have his red line crossed repeatedly without doing anything. Here's the president.
There seem to be some people killed that aren't supposed to be killed. These are violent, if you call them leaders, I don't know if they're leaders or just they rule through violence. But we're looking at it very seriously. The military is looking at it, and we're looking at some very strong options. We'll make a determination.
Okay, meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal points out that Iran is in an unprecedentedly weak position, probably the weakest position that the Iranian regime has been in since 1979. The reason being, Israel's 12-day war, followed by the American strike on the Fordo nuclear facility, demonstrated that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is not competent. They're not good at anything, apparently, aside from shooting their own citizens. According to the Wall Street Journal, the Ayatollah's rule was shaped by the bloody 8-year war that Saddam Hussein's Iraq launched in the aftermath of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The social compact that endured since that trauma was that Iranians would acquiesce to hardship and restrictions in return for a strong state that protects them from foreign attack. That assumption came crashing down when Iranian-backed Hamas and Hezbollah attacked Israel in 2023, triggering a regional war that brought death and destruction into the heart of Tehran last summer. Now protesters are braving arrest or bullets as they demand not just changes in policy, but the downfall of the Islamic Republic itself. Ali Fayez, the Iran project director at the International Crisis Group, says this was the last straw. The regime over the years had argued that although it has not been able to bring about prosperity or pluralism for the Iranians, at least it had brought them safety and security. Turns out it didn't. Now the people have reached the point of saying enough is enough. So it'll be interesting to see where things go from here. Obviously, the IRGC is the real power in Iran, and whoever has the guns makes the rules, is the general rule of foreign policy. However, if the population mobilizes in serious fashion against the IRGC, and if President Trump keeps his word, that if the IRGC keeps mowing down Iranians in the streets, there will be some sort of military action, thus demonstrating that the IRGC is unable to stand up to foreign military intervention. Or let's say the United States starts simply capturing all of the Iranian oil ships that are wandering around the globe in violation of sanctions right now, thus continuing to destroy the Iranian economy. How exactly does the IRGC hold up its end of the bargain? It does take money to keep the IRGC in line. It does take money, just like it does in Venezuela. You got to pay off all of your apparatchiks. You got to give them the nice houses. You have to give them the nice cars. If you don't have those things to give away, it makes it difficult to keep them in line. Because then they say, what am I shooting my neighbor for? At least if I was shooting my neighbor and getting a nicer house out of it, that's one thing. But if there is no money to go around, then at that point, perhaps the IRGC support for the regime bleeds away. That at least is the recommendation that is currently being made by Saeed Ghassaminejad and Benem Ben Taleblu over in the Wall Street Journal, saying that just as the United States did with Venezuela, we can simply cut off the oil supplies from Iran. They say Mr. Trump can change the impression that Washington will sit this out by targeting the regime's economic arteries and signal to Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei that the price of slaughtering his own people is the total collapse of his state's financial viability. Iran is already under severe economic strain. Its currency has fallen. When we say it's fallen, by the way, we mean that the Iranian rial amounts to something like $0.00000001, something like that. Tehran still exports more than 2 million barrels of oil a day, which generates revenue to fund its proxies and oppress Iranians and advance their ballistic missile and nuclear program. To break the regime's will, these commentators suggest the U.S. must move beyond designating vessels on paper and start physically confiscating the tankers that transfer the Iranian oil. The U.S. already has the legal tools to do this. Civil forfeiture allows the U.S. to seize the illicit cargo and the tanker itself. Oil is a renewable resource, but a specialized tanker is a strategic asset. A seizure is a foreclosure. We just need to actually take the tanker. So that is one suggestion that has been put out there. There's also been the suggestion that the United States strike directly at particular IRGC facilities in Tehran, their specific command and control centers that, if taken out, would seriously degrade the regime's ability to crack down on the dissidents who are in the streets. There's supposed to be a meeting on Tuesday between Secretary of State Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Joint Chiefs Chair General Dan Kane with the President of the United States about which sort of steps should be deployed. Obviously, lack of internet access in Iran is a major problem right now. My understanding is that Starlink is being activated over Iran, or already is active over Iran, but there are not enough sort of dishes, receiving bases in Iran to do it. That seems to be the current claim anyway. Here's President Trump talking about activating Starlink in Iran.
Well, we're going to be talking about that. We may get the internet going, if that's possible. We may speak to Elon, because as you know, he's very good at that kind of thing. He's got a very good company. So we may speak to Elon Musk. And in fact, I'm going to call him as soon as I'm finished with you.
President Trump suggested that the leaders of Iran have called to negotiate. I'm not sure exactly what they would negotiate at this point. They have no trust. They continue to speak publicly about how much they hate President Trump and are not going to listen to President Trump. Jacob Hellberg, State Department Undersecretary for Economic Affairs, wrote Sunday on social media that President Trump's strategy of maximum pressure has brought the regime to its knees. President Trump on Saturday posted to social media, Iran is looking at freedom, perhaps like never before. The USA stands ready to help. And he linked to a story about a man in London who removed Iran's flag from its embassy and replaced it with an anti-regime banner. The State Department posted on X, do not play games with President Trump. When he says he'll do something, he means it. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance suggested that the smartest thing for the Iranians to do is for them to have a real negotiation with the United States about their nuclear program. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. That's nonsense. That's just crap. That's silly. I like the vice president, but that's nonsense. The notion that the Iranians could make any guarantee to the United States that would now be sufficient to quiet our concerns about the revival of a nuclear program is silly talk. It is undermining, by the way, the protesters who are in the streets. If the suggestion is that if the mullahs say pretty words, then the United States will withdraw its support for the protesters and watch them get mowed down by the thousands, that is a problem. That is foolish. Again, none of this is a call for hundreds of thousands of troops on the ground in Iran. Again, no one is talking about Iraq. The Iraq War syndrome, as I discussed last week, is broken. No one wants a gigantic American occupation of Iran. No one. That's silly talk. The question is, what options are on the table that would protect the protesters, weaken the regime, and allow the Iranian people to take the situation into their own hands? And obviously, there's a risk-reward calculation here that has to be made by the President of the United States. Tehran is suggesting that it will consider targeting U.S. military facilities as well as Israel if it detects signs of an impending attack. Now, realistically speaking, if Iran were to strike back, let's say that the United States were to fly some F-16s into Iran, take out some IRGC facilities, and then Iran were to fire a bunch of missiles at Qatari air bases, Al Udeid, for example. First of all, their retaliatory response thus far has been lackluster, shall we say. Israel completely defenestrated Iran's military in the 12-day war earlier last year. But if the Iranian government truly decides to attack American troops in the region in retaliation for a couple of pinpoint strikes, deterring the IRGC from murdering people in the streets, that will be the end of the regime, and it will be performed largely through air power. And no one is talking about a full-scale, boots-on-the-ground intervention in Iran. I'm going to say that over and over and over because a bunch of people will lie to you. They're going to lie to you. They'll spend all day, today, tomorrow, and the next day, playing defense for the Iranian regime by claiming that somehow the stability of a mullah-led regime is the superior option in a country of 80 million people, the vast bulk of whom wish not to live under a mullahocracy, and where there was a functioning government before. Yeah, this bizarre notion that the best available option is to keep the mullahs in place. How and why? And the gigantic lie upon which that is predicated, which is that the only two choices, the false choice, is between keeping the mullahs in place, negotiating with them, massaging them, allowing them to shoot people in the streets. That's one choice. And the other choice is full-scale, 200,000 American troops on the ground in Tehran. Nonsense, absolute tripe. People who are spewing it are as full of it as they were back in June when they suggested that World War III would break out if the United States struck the Fordo nuclear facility. Of course, none of that happened. The reason that Iran is saying all of this, of course, is to create precisely that sort of dyspepsia inside the United States. That doesn't mean, by the way, that there isn't risk. Here's a map, for example, of American bases in the Middle East. The United States has a wide variety of bases all over the Middle East. You can see them ranging from Kuwait to Qatar. The United States has bases that are close to the border of Iran in Iraq. And those are very real concerns. And no one is pretending those away. But I promise you, the military options being considered by the Trump administration, an administration that is deeply, deeply unlikely to want to engage America in an Iraq-like war. I mean, President Trump literally was elected to office in 2016 on the basis of breaking with his party and arguing against the Iraq war. If you think Trump wants to be involved in something like that, you're out of your mind. Okay, but obviously the United States has a presence at, for example, Erbil Air Base. The United States has a presence at Balad Air Base. The United States has a large presence, of course, in Qatar, some in Bahrain, some in UAE. Could the Iranians strike at that and provide risk to American troops? Of course. So that is why you have people like General Dan Raisin Kane in charge of military option making, and Secretary of State Rubio and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and all the rest. Now, what is certainly untrue, what is truly silly, is the perspective taken by Senator Tim Kaine. Remember, this guy was almost vice president of the United States under Hillary Clinton, Senator Tim Kaine. I know you forgot about him. He's the other Tim, not Walls Kaine. He says that if the United States were involved in the toppling of the mullahs, this would somehow be reminiscent of the toppling of the Iranian president, Mohammad Mossadegh, back in 1953. First of all, that's silly. The reality is that the toppling of Mossadegh was not, in fact, a predominantly Western operation. It was a domestic operation by the Shah of Iran, who had the constitutional power to get rid of Mossadegh. But put that aside. Put aside the actual history of what happened in Iran in 1953. Even if you want to make the case that Mossadegh was somehow a popular leader, a case unsupportable in the historical record, since he tried to literally dissolve the legislature and the judiciary. Even if you want to make that case, is the claim here that the Iranian people are in favor of the mullahs and that the fall of the mullahs would somehow be anti the Iranian people, who are out there by the millions protesting in the dark with no internet?
Margaret, U.S. military action in Iran would be a massive mistake. It would have the effect of giving the Iranian regime the ability to say it's the U.S. that's screwing our country up. U.S. military action would just bring back the painful history of the U.S. Toppling the Iranian prime minister back in the 1950s, and would give the regime the ability to blame their own failures on the United States.
They're literally already doing it. They're already doing it. So the idea is that you can never do, great. So the coin toss is heads I win, tails you lose. The idea is Iran will blame the United States if we do nothing, and Iran will also blame the United States if we do something. The question here is just what would be the most effective thing at the lowest risk to the United States? Period. Because would the geopolitical balance of power shift dramatically in America's favor were the regime to be overthrown and something America-friendly put in place? Absolutely. Iran is one of the biggest suppliers of oil to China on planet Earth. Iran's support for the Chinese regime and the Russian regime, by the way, is exorbitant. It is Iranian drones that are flying into Ukrainian buildings in Ukraine. Iran has been an oil supplier and military weaponry supplier to places like Russia and an oil supplier to places like China for decades, aside from funding literally every terrorist group around the region. The change that would happen in the Middle East if the Iranian regime were to fall, and again, no one, for the 100th time, no one is calling for a boots on the ground, 100,000 strong invasion of Iran. No one. We are talking now about what is the most efficacious action that could be taken to shift the geopolitics of the Middle East. If that were to happen, it would not only be a boon to the Iranian people, which of course would be fabulous, it would also be a boon to the broader Middle East and to American interests worldwide. The Trump administration knows that. That is why President Trump is considering some form of action in Iran. But thankfully, we have the Hollywood coterie to inform us that the real issue we should all be worried about is not what's happening in Iran. It's the fact that ICE is trying to do its job. Meanwhile, the chaos surrounding ICE continues, largely because the left has decided to turn ICE into a national issue. And again, what President Trump has been doing with ICE is highly controversial because he has been deploying large-scale ICE raids into particular left-wing areas. Is that the best way of addressing the problem? Well, it accomplishes two things. One, actually, criminal illegal immigrants are being arrested and deported. And two, it is making clear to illegal immigrants that it may happen to them. And so you're getting an enormous amount of self-deportation. That really is the purpose of what is going on right now. Now, with that said, everything in American politics gets boiled down into the dumbest version of itself. That is what has happened with the Renee Good situation. We played the tape a little bit earlier. Kristi Noem, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, had a bit of a hot interview with Jake Tapper over on CNN. They got into the tape of Renee Good and also, comparatively, the tape of the shooting of Ashley Babbitt on January 6th. Because the point that Tapper is making is, if Ashley Babbitt was a victim, why isn't Renee Good a victim? By the way, my perspective on both of those cases is that law enforcement was investigated in both of those cases, or will be investigated in the case of Renee Good. And the question, as always, is objective fear of a reasonable officer. And Ashley Babbitt was breaking through an area of the Capitol building when she was shot by the available data. Does that mean that what happened to her wasn't a tragedy? No. Does that mean that she intended death on the officer? Also no. But that's not the question. Again, it all comes down to the objective, reasonable expectation of the officer. The problem that I have in analyzing, again, many of these situations is try to look at the objective facts without reference to the politics of the people involved. Anyway, here was Jake Tapper with Kristi Noem of DHS.
The first thing you said was, quote, what happened was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow. Correct. Because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle, and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and rammed them with her vehicle. That's not what happened. We all saw what happened.
It absolutely is what happened. Those officers had been out in enforcement action. A vehicle had been stuck. They had come to help get that vehicle out. That's when this individual started blocking traffic for minutes and minutes.
You said that the woman attacked them and surrounded them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle.
Blocked the road for a long time and was yelling at them and impeding a federal law enforcement investigation.
I just showed you video of people attacking law enforcement officers. Undisputed proof, undisputed evidence. And I just said President Trump pardoned all of them. And you said that President Trump is enforcing all the laws equally. It's just not true. There's a different standard for law enforcement officials being attacked if they're being attacked by Trump supporters. We just saw that.
This individual and these instances and these investigations all have to be taken and done correctly in context of every situation that is happening on the ground. So what we are doing today as the Department of Homeland Security is out there with our law enforcement officers, making sure that we're targeting the worst of the worst and that we're talking factually about each situation.
Okay, so literally that's what you should have done in the first place. Again, I said this when this news broke, is that she should have waited until the investigation was done and all the tape was out. The attempt to jump to conclusions by everyone at all times is the enemy of good sense and also conciliation in the American Republic. If you just jump to whatever is your favorite narrative, regardless whether you're left or right, in the middle of a fraught situation, you very often end up getting it wrong and making things worse in the process because you end up having to double down. Again, whether you are left or right, the left has doubled down on the idea that Renee Good did nothing wrong whatsoever, that she was, just an innocent who happened to be in a place at a time, which is not true. And then, of course, Kristi Noem's original statement had problems with it, for sure. Okay, bottom line, however, is that all of this is adding fuel to the fire for all of the anti-ICE protesters, which, of course, will lead to more confrontations with ICE, which will lead to more violence, because you cannot have more confrontation with the cops without it eventually leading to some violence. According to the Daily Wire, following the fatal shooting of Renee Good in Minneapolis, the radical ICE Watch organization she was working with is pushing to get more activists onto the streets. The ICE Watch groups, which organize activists to follow and obstruct federal immigration agents making arrests across the country, are trying to get more activists out onto the streets where the Trump administration has warned they could put their lives in danger. On Saturday, thousands of activists participated in a church training in Roseville, Minnesota, where they were encouraged to annoy agents like mosquitoes. One of the local Minneapolis ICE Watch groups, known as Defend the 612, held a training day the day after the shooting for anyone who wants to learn how to plug in and for those who have already been in the streets and can share lessons from that experience. So, this is just going to continue. Meanwhile, ICE Out for Good protests rallied nationwide over the weekend. They're expected to be in the tens of thousands in Minneapolis. Here is some footage of a large rally against ICE in Minneapolis.
Protest in Minneapolis. Thousands of demonstrators gathering today in the cold to make their voices heard following Wednesday's fatal shooting of Renee Good.
Their message was clear. They want ICE out of the city of Minneapolis, and they are furious over the killing of Renee Good. Now, that protest began, like I mentioned, here at Powderhorn Park in Minneapolis, which is located less than a mile away from where Renee Good was shot and killed by an immigration officer on Wednesday morning.
Now, again, the rhetoric being used is unhinged. I mean, listen, you can look right there. There's a sign in the background that shows a swastika being crossed out saying no fascism. The members of ICE are not the Sturmabteilung. They're not. They're not the SA. They're not the SS. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You need to stop this. It's ridiculous. One protester was with our own Brecca Stoll, who's been on the ground covering all of this, and compared ICE to the SS, which, of course, if ICE were the SS, this lady wouldn't be on the streets in the first place.
We've heard a lot of people today. We went to protests that talked about how ICE isn't a real job. Do you think ICE is a real job?
I mean, I think that ICE is a real job in the same way that being a member of the SS was a real job. Mm-hmm. Sure, it's a job. Mm-hmm. It's a job that the people who hold it should be condemned for and ashamed of.
Okay, then. Meanwhile, that is being echoed by members of the Democratic Congress. Senator Chris Murphy, again, a man who wants to run for president for no reason I can discern, says that it's inhumane and illegal what happened here.
Well, of course you need a domestic enforcement mechanism for the immigration laws of this country, but the way in which ICE is operating today is inhumane and illegal. This is the most high-profile and most heinous act of violence that has been undertaken, but there have already been over a dozen shootings all across our country by ICE officers. The bottom line is that the way in which DHS is conducting itself today is making our communities less safe. It's not adding to public safety.
They're not adding to public safety. What would add to public safety is presumably not enforcing the law. Representative Ayanna Pressley, the Ringo star of the squad, she's always the one who gets forgotten, right? You got AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. So many luminaries. And then you have Ayanna Pressley, who just sort of gets forgotten. Here she was, trying to outcompete them by saying that President Trump is a dictator now. Again, if you lived in a dictatorship, you know what? You wouldn't be able to say any of this.
ICE cannot be reformed. This has nothing to do with training or new protocols. This is about cultural practices that have been underway for many years. And again, not only the brutality and the constitutional abuses of ICE in our streets, but what is happening in our ICE facilities where people are being detained and warehoused, and many of them unlawfully. We have had over 30 deaths in ICE facilities.
Okay, so again, keep ratcheting it up. Ilhan Omar says that ICE is an occupying force. Again, this terror group sympathizer says that ICE is an occupying force. All right.
Federal law enforcement is being sent as an occupying force. This is to create fear, is to terrorize our communities. It is to tell us that we are powerless, and it is dangerous because the American people are used to knowing their constitutional rights. The American people know that ICE agents and border control agents have no jurisdiction over them in our urban cities. They know that they're only supposed to interact with them if they're crossing a border or if they are doing something that relates to immigration and customs. So this doesn't make any sense. And what this administration is looking for is for there to be deadly encounters so that they can revoke the Insurrection Act and have martial law. And it is a dangerous escalation that they're looking for. And Minneapolis residents are not going to give them that.
Wait, so she just said that ICE doesn't have any internal authority in the United States? They don't have the capacity to do like immigration raids at all, according to Ilhan Omar? American citizens and Americans generally, people who live in America, don't have to be worried about, ICE knocking on your door if you are engaged in welfare fraud and you are an illegal immigrant Somali. Okay, then meanwhile, Tom Homan, apparently the only sane person in the room, he says ICE is, looking for dangerous people because that's what we actually do.
ICE is out looking for dangerous people. It's not okay to impede and interfere with an officer. Would it be okay if a citizen impeded and interfered with a U.S. Marshal arresting a fugitive? No. Is it okay if they stood in before the FBI when they're going to arrest a terrorist? No. These are targeted enforcement operations. They're arresting bad people. And it's illegal. Let's remember, what she did was a crime. It's illegal to interfere and impede with ICE law enforcement officers. That's why we're there.
As Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, has pointed out, speaking with Chris Rufo, these groups don't exist in a vacuum. Someone finances them.
When you see these protesters, someone is financing them. There are safe houses that when you see the 300 people with the same laser that they're using to blind DHS agents in courthouses in Portland, someone bought those lasers. And again, what we do is follow the money. Just like we followed it with the mafia, just like we follow it with the drug cartels. And we will find out who's done this.
Okay, so, again, the fact that this is ratcheting up and ratcheting up and ratcheting up is a bad thing. And two things can be true at once. What happened in Minneapolis is a tragedy, and the insane ire that is being driven against ICE by Democrats will lead to further violence and make this even worse from here. Meanwhile, the Minneapolis fraud situation continues to grow. It's not going anywhere. That is not going to stop Minneapolis politicians from defending the people who presided over the fraud. It is kind of an incredible thing when you think about it. If you're a Democrat and you want big government programs, like you love big government programs, that's the way you help people, is by taking money from these people and giving it to these people and helping the poor and helping the suffering through redistribution of tax resources. The thing you should hate the most is fraud, right? You should hate it because it undermines the entire reason for your program. In the same way that here at the Daily Wire, if I found out that somebody was embezzling a lot of money, I would find who they were and I would fire them and then prosecute them. That's because I care about the money in our organization and where it goes and what we use it for, obviously. In the same way, you would imagine the Democrats presiding over their states, localities, federal programs, that they would care deeply about the waste of money and the fraud. But they don't. Instead, they just defend the people who presided over the fraud. It's unbelievable. Here is Ilhan Omar defending Tim Walz for presiding over what is likely billions of dollars in fraud in her state.
Governor Walz did choose to not run for re-election. He dropped out of the race because of all of this.
Because he wants to focus
on defending our state and not defending a seat.
Do you think there has been a sufficient level of accountability and ownership of the failure to have oversight here? Do you think this ends?
That is what we want. We want to collaboratively work with the administration to try to make sure that there is no fraud that's being perpetuated on our state. What we do not want is the level of terror, of confusion, of chaos that is being created without any results.
Well, then you know what you could do? You could yourself investigate the fraud and root it out and get rid of the politicians who have been doing it, but you're not going to do any of that. That is why what is happening is happening. Meanwhile, Jacob Frey, the mayor of Minneapolis, he's the one who is cursing at ICE and calling them essentially a terror group and all the rest. He says that, yeah, actually, the fraud's real. It's kind of a thing that did happen. I mean, he'll admit that.
Well, look, Governor Walz is the reason that we've got paid family leave in Minnesota. He's the reason we've got free school lunches. Him and I, we've been through thick and thin.
But did he do enough to combat fraud,
over these
Mayor? Did he do enough to combat fraud?
Look, obviously, everybody could have done more to prevent fraud. And I think that's a fair point to make. Do more to prevent fraud. And you look what he's doing right now. He's setting up a whole bunch of infrastructure to do that. And by the way, look, the fraud's real. We've all got to acknowledge it. The fraud is very real.
So if the fraud is real and you didn't do enough to combat it, why are you still defending the dude? Pretty incredible stuff. And the answer, of course, is because you can't have big government without the fraud. And the fraud is, in fact, the point in many of these cases because you're paying off constituents in particular ways. What's happening in New York also, according to Breitbart, a Bronx apartment building New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani showcased to highlight the talents of his new housing commissioner has accumulated almost 200 unresolved violations, including citations for broken doors, broken refrigerators, rat and roach infestation, and potentially hazardous mold. That is the conclusion of an exclusive New York Post investigation of the nonprofit-owned and operated building in Morris Heights that the newly elected mayor cited to highlight the talents of his new housing commissioner, Dina Levy. The Post reported, quote, the 102-unit building at 1520 Sedgwick Avenue in Morris Heights as of Saturday had a staggering 194 open housing code violations dating back to 2016. Mamdani visited that affordable housing complex January 4th to introduce Levy, whom the report described as a longtime tenants' rights advocate and former state housing official, naming her Housing Preservation and Development Commissioner. I mean, really well done. According to one tenant, quote, since the nonprofit took over, the building has deteriorated. They lack porters. No one maintains it. The complaints fall on deaf ears, especially if you complain a lot. Yeah, because it turns out that the thing that keeps landlords making the repairs is the profit margin, is the reality that if they don't, people will move out and then their apartment will be worthless. Market mechanisms are always going to work better than non-market mechanisms. But that's never the point. The point is always spreading the money to your friends. That's always the point in the end. Okay, meanwhile, the other gigantic controversy of the day, the Trump Department of Justice has apparently now initiated an investigation into the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. According to the New York Times, the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. has opened a criminal investigation into Powell about whether Powell lied to Congress about the scope of the project. According to officials briefed on the situation, the inquiry was approved in November by Jeanine Pirro. The investigation escalates Trump's long-running feud with Powell, whom the president has continually attacked for resisting his demands to slash interest rates significantly. Apparently, now again, Powell's term as chair ends in May. He'll still stay on through January 2028 unless he steps down early. Trump wants him to step down early so that his vote goes away. So the actual investigation, presumably, is into comments made with regard to the rebuild and reno at the center of the Federal Reserve. The reno broke ground in 2022. It was set to be completed in 2027. It's going to run $700 million over budget. The project involves expanding and modernizing the Mariner S. Eccles building and another building on Constitution Avenue, which dates all the way back to the 1930s. The Fed says neither of those buildings has been comprehensively renovated since their construction nearly 100 years ago, suggesting they were in need of significant overhaul. So the central bank has cited expenses tied to materials, equipment, and labor, because when the original estimate was made, it was back in 2021. The plans have changed, and also things were less expensive in 2021 than they are now. Here is my question. Obviously, Powell could have said things that were accurate at the time and later became inaccurate because the facts on the ground changed. Is there evidence that Powell was stealing money or embezzling? Well, what is the case here, in other words? And why is it that the Trump administration, the two people who he seems to be focused on very much at the Federal Reserve are people who have opposed his agenda? There's a reason why the markets are roiling this morning. This is bad policy. You should not be targeting people based on specious investigations. If it turns out that it's specious, again, there may be something there. There's suspicion that's what was happening with John Bolton. And then it turns out that John Bolton may very well have breached national security. I don't know the full case with regard to Jerome Powell, but if it turns out that what they're upset at him about has little to do with the actual reno of the Federal Reserve and a lot to do with his policy with regard to interest rates, because Trump wants to keep cutting those interest rates. Again, I don't believe that the interest rates need to be cut, actually. I think the interest rates are where they need to be to prevent inflation from happening, given the money that's been pouring into the economy. And it is a risky financial move. And again, just to put it out there, the DOJ should not be used for political purposes, whether you are targeting Donald J. Trump and your name is Joseph R. Biden, or whether you are targeting Jerome Powell and your name is President Donald J. Trump. Here was Jerome Powell responding to these accusations.
Good evening. On Friday, the Department of Justice served the Federal Reserve with grand jury subpoenas, threatening a criminal indictment related to my testimony before the Senate Banking Committee last June. That testimony concerned in part a multi-year project to renovate historic Federal Reserve office buildings. I have deep respect for the rule of law and for accountability in our democracy. No one, certainly not the chair of the Federal Reserve, is above the law. But this unprecedented action should be seen in the broader context of the administration's threats and ongoing pressure. This new threat is not about my testimony last June or about the renovation of the Federal Reserve buildings. It is not about Congress's oversight role. The Fed, through testimony and other public disclosures, made every effort to keep Congress informed about the renovation project. Those are pretexts. The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
Okay, now, again, this is a mistake. The president should not be intervening in Federal Reserve policy in this way. All it does is create uncertainty in an economy that is doing quite well by all available reports. The roiling because of the tariffs has not overcome the momentum in the economy. But playing with fire here is not a good response. So, in better news, and I think more uplifting news, we at the Daily Wire, we have brought on board Matt Fradd. Matt Fradd is the host of a show called Pints with Aquinas, which is really about Christian apologetics and biblical apologetics, biblical morality. It's a great show. It's existed for a long time. We couldn't be more excited to bring it on platform. I had the opportunity to sit down with Matt. Here's what it sounded like. Well, Matt Fradd is here. The Catholic takeover of Daily Wire is nearly complete. Pints with Aquinas is finally coming to air. So, Matt, welcome. We are very excited about the show. For people who don't know about Pints with Aquinas, what exactly are you going to be talking about?
Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be here, first of all. Pints with Aquinas has been going on for about 10 years now. I thought I was going to absorb you, but y'all absorb me, and that's fine. And it's terrific. They're long-form discussions about faith, philosophy, and theology. The very first episode we did is with Dr. Brant Petra, who's a theologian, and that goes live today on Daily Wire, YouTube, everywhere, so people can check it out in Pints with Aquinas. And we talk about the historicity of the New Testament, why it's bananas to say that Jesus was a mythical figure. And we even talk about Christ's claims to be God. A lot of skeptics will say, sure, later on in the Gospel of John, you get a divine Jesus. Bart Ehrman says this sort of stuff. But in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not so much. And that's just not true. And so it's like a 3-hour discussion about this stuff. And it's really fascinating. It's not 3 hours for the sake of 3 hours. Like that could get boring. It's 3 hours with a really brilliant, articulate individual. And so we have a lot of things like that coming up.
So I've talked to you a lot about this in the past, but I think one of the things that you do uniquely is approach faith from an intellectual perspective. And that doesn't just give people the sort of arguments that they need in order to defend their faith, but it also provides a permission structure for people to say, hey, look, smart people actually believe this stuff. Because I think the number one weapon for the new atheists for a couple of decades was only dumb people are religious. And that seems to be an argument that's sort of fallen out of favor lately.
100%. Yeah. Thomas Aquinas made this clear. One doesn't need faith to know that God exists. One doesn't need revelation to know that God exists. One can look at different arguments that have been presented over the years by like Aristotle and Anselm and even Aquinas himself to show that there is an uncaused cause, an unmoved mover, and so on. So even if every individual can't maybe reason their way to God's existence, they can believe it on faith, but that this is not an irrational thing to believe. And that's important.
So one of the reasons that obviously we wanted to work with you and bring Pints of Aquinas on board is because we believe that the revitalization of Christianity in particular in the West, but faith generally, is really important in an increasingly secular world. There's been a lot of talk lately about the sort of religious trends among young Americans. And it seems like there's two simultaneous trends. One is that fewer people are going to church, and the other is that the people who are going to church are going much more often. You're seeing this in I think every religious community, actually. You're seeing this in the Jewish community as well. Fewer people who are Jewish by birth are actually practicing Judaism, but the ones who are becoming increasingly Orthodox. Well, what do you make of that? And do you see the possibility of a broader spread, not just sort of a revitalization of the very religious core of each movement, but a broader spread back to a place where church going is dominant, say?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts here. I mean, the new atheism went off like a smoke bomb within culture, and people couldn't see straight, and they were given the impression that perhaps religion was just for stupid, naive people. That seems to have dissipated. I think Jordan Peterson, in a way, was a gateway drug for many people to take another look at Christianity and not mock it or Judaism or just belief in God in general. And I think the reason a lot of people are returning to more orthodox and traditional forms of Christianity, what we would call apostolic Christianity, like Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and so on, is because I think they long for ritual. They long to connect themselves to something with a historical pedigree, and they don't want their faith to be patronized. We live in a very secular society, and I think a lot of people desire to find a place of reverence where they can, as it were, kiss the earth, to find a place like Moses, right? Take the shoes off and stand honestly before the good God. Also probably has a lot to do with the sexual perversion that was foisted upon us for the last 50 plus years, which is just insane and leads to complete misery. And so I think one of the reasons Catholicism in particular is very attractive right now is that if people are looking to Christianity, even though there's individual priests and bad Catholics, just as there are bad people everywhere who would promote something contrary to church teaching, if you look at what the Catholic Church teaches about things like homosexual acts and contraception and abortion and IVF, like it's pretty hardcore. And I wonder if that isn't part of it, where, okay, if I'm going to do this Christianity thing, I'm going to do it seriously. I wonder, is that true in Judaism? Do you find if people are returning to Judaism, they're returning to more traditional?
Yeah, I mean, and that's also true personally. When people tend to return to religion, in Judaism, the term that is used is Baal Teshuvah, which means literally master of repentance, is that when people go from not Orthodox to Orthodox, they become like the most Orthodox. And I think that's fairly common in conversion stories. You kind of go all the way.
Yeah, we're seeing that today, right? Online, people are going full on, which is beautiful. But from a Christian perspective, I would think that if a person who's coming back to Christianity is more concerned with other people's sins than their own, this is not a good sign. That we really should be in a state of continual repentance before the all good and all loving God, so we can trust in his repentance. It's not a sort of slavish fear of God, but that's my fear, because online there's a lot of people who are sneering and are triumphal, and okay, maybe there's I don't know if there's a place for that ever, but the first thing should be a desire to amend my own life by the grace of God.
And one of the things that I think is pretty good advice is that people should be in a system for a while before they immediately go to the front and start preaching from the pulpit. And you see this a lot in both politics and also in religion, is that people are sort of the newly converted.
Yeah.
And the first thing they do is they run to the front of the church or the front of the synagogue and pick up the book and they say, well, now I know this book.
Yeah.
And say, well, you might not know all the sort of bends here. You might not know the interpretations. You might not know the doctrine. You might just be reading it and think you know what you're talking about. But it takes experience in a system to really understand the system, which is one of the reasons why I think that your show is so vital. So obviously your show is largely Catholic, but it's not directed specifically at Catholics. And when you're talking to audiences who aren't Catholic, well, why do you think they should listen?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I would say, like, cards on the table, my desire is that all people would become Catholic. So if they're a Protestant or a Jew or an atheist, I think Catholicism has the fullness of the truth, and I wouldn't want to patronize people by pretending that's what I don't want that. But that said, I mean, I love, for example, my Protestant brothers and sisters. We share a lot in common. I read Protestant authors and greatly benefit from some of their teaching. And so, yeah, we're going to have some Protestants, some Orthodox on the show, but primarily Catholic. But I mean, as I say, this first episode that releases today will be something that all strands of Christians ought to enjoy because it has to do with the reliability of the Gospels and Christ's claims to be divine, etc.
So, as you move forward, how do you hope the show develops? How often is the show? How often are people going to be able to engage with it?
Yeah, so we have a long-form interview show every single week, and then we're doing a second episode which is where we're working on that format right now, but it'll enable people who follow the show to be more in contact with me. So it'll be me taking phone calls and me responding to people's questions on faith-related issues and personal issues as well. So that's the goal for now. Obviously, a lot of clips on our clip channel, and then we have a lot of ideas. We're thinking about doing a 5 minutes on like the 21 ecumenical councils or understand the Protestant Reformation in 5 minutes and those sorts of things. So there's a lot of thoughts.
Well, Matt Fradd, we could not be more excited to have you aboard. And folks, you should go check out Pints with Aquinas right now, available over at Daily Wire and everywhere else. Alrighty, folks, the show continues for our members right now. We'll get to President Trump's somewhat strange announcement that he's going to somehow, I don't know how, cap credit card rates, like the interest rates. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. Democrats are way ahead in the polling for 2026 in Congress. We'll talk about why that's happening and what needs to change. We'll also get into affordability as well as some bizarre journalistic ethics questions. First, our Daily Wire Plus Black Friday. It's here right now. Get your annual Daily Wire Plus membership for half the price. All the shows, all the movies, all the news you need. 50% off. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Well, we have new economic news. We'll talk about that in a moment. It actually is quite good for the Trump administration. However, we begin with the fact that Democrats in polling currently have a massive advantage in Congress for 2026. According to the latest NPR PBS News Marist poll survey of 1,443 adults conducted from November 10th to 13th, found the Democrats hold their largest advantage since 2017 in terms of who people would vote for on the congressional ballot, the generic congressional ballot. Now, remember, you're not voting on a generic congressperson when you actually go to the polling place. You are voting on your congressperson. And so it's possible that widespread dissatisfaction with the Republican Party doesn't necessarily translate into your individual congressperson losing his or her seat. However, Democrats currently hold a 14-point advantage in this poll, which is a very, very large advantage. If that were to stick in the generic congressional ballot, you'd be looking at a Democratic wave in 2026. President Trump, in this polling, his approval rating is just 39%, which is his lowest since right after January 6th. A combined 6 in 10 people blame congressional Republicans or Trump for the government shutdown, which, again, well done legacy media for somehow spinning a completely Democrat caused government shutdown into a story about President Trump and Republican intransigence. Nearly 6 in 10 say that Trump's top priority should be lowering prices. No other issue comes close, actually. So again, those are very bad numbers for the Republicans right now. What does that mean for the 2026 election? Well, in the fall of 2022, Democrats had a lead in the generic congressional ballot. They ended up losing 9 House seats to the Republicans. In 2018, during Trump's first term, the Democrats' lead was somewhere between 6 and 12 points, and they ended up winning 40 seats. In 2014, when Obama was president, Republicans had a 5-point advantage and the GOP gained 13 seats. So the number of actual vulnerable districts has shrunk fairly dramatically. So even if Democrats have a gigantic advantage in the generic congressional balloting, again, the way that the districts are stacked up, there are a lot more solid Dem districts and a lot more solid Republican districts and fewer swing districts overall. In fact, we asked our sponsors over at Perplexity. They have a brand new web browser called Comet. And we asked, how many vulnerable Republican seats are there in the House for 2026? And what is the likely range of Democratic wins? And according to Comet, there are about 20 to 25 highly vulnerable Republican House seats going into the 2026 midterm elections based on expert forecasts and ratings of competitive districts. Those vulnerable seats are concentrated in swing districts with close 2024 results. There are a bunch of open seats due to retirement, and there are areas with unfavorable demographic shifts for the GOP. Key battlegrounds include districts in Nebraska, Iowa, Pennsylvania, California, and New Hampshire. According to many analyses, 10 to 12 of those seats are currently ranked as toss-ups, and another 8 to 15 are listed as lean Democratic or lean Republican. So all of those could shift depending on, again, how the generalized feeling about the Republican Party goes. Remember, Democrats need 3 seats to take control of the House. 3. So what is the most likely outcome? Well, I mean, probably the upper end of disaster for Republicans is like 25 seats, 20 to 25 seats, which would put Democrats pretty solidly in control of the House. Now, it would take a massive Democratic wave in order for them to actually take the Senate. The Senate map for the Democrats is not good. Again, asking our sponsors over at Comet, the most vulnerable Senate seats for Republicans in 2026, and the likelihood of Republicans losing them. So the two most vulnerable seats are in Maine and in North Carolina. Senator Susan Collins, frequently a sort of target for many dyspeptic Republicans who don't understand that if you want a Republican to hold the seat in Maine, that Republican is not going to look like Tom Cotton or Rick Scott. That Republican is going to look like Susan Collins. Susan Collins is a battler and a survivor up in Maine. She's the only Republican incumbent running in a state won by a 2024 Democratic presidential nominee, meaning this is the only senator who is up for election as a Republican in a state Kamala won. It is a top Democratic target. That, of course, is a very fraught seat. That race right now has as the leading Democratic candidate, not the sitting governor of Maine, but actually a radical Democratic socialist, Graham Plattner, who is a disaster area for a wide variety of reasons. It'll be an interesting race. And then you have North Carolina. That seat has opened up because Tom Tillis, a frequent target of the president, has decided that he is not going to run for reelect. And so that seat opens up and maybe that seat swivels blue. So that's 2 seats. But remember, Republicans hold 53 seats, which means that in order for Democrats to take control of the Senate, they would need to take 2 more. Right? So even assuming you lose Maine, you lose North Carolina, Republicans still have 51. The next most likely switches would be Texas, Iowa, and Alaska. Now, Texas is always the kind of great white whale for Democrats. They're always saying this will be the year that they finally take Texas. That Texas race is John Cornyn. John Cornyn, of course, is facing a pretty dramatic primary challenge from Ken Paxton. Paxton is a significantly less good general election candidate than Cornyn. So that race could be a little bit dicey for the Republicans. Iowa is a very red state, but Joni Ernst, who's a very popular senator, is leaving that seat open. And open seats get a little dicey. If it's a big Democratic wave in Iowa, you could theoretically see Republicans lose that Iowa seat. And then that would take Republicans down to 50. And at that point, you'd have the Vice President, J.D. Vance, breaking any ties in the Senate. There'd be no margin for error for the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune. There's one more race that is up for Republicans. That is the Ohio race. John Husted is the current senator. He is running against Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown, you'll recall, is one of the senators who just lost a race. He is now coming back. He lost to Bernie Moreno. He's now coming back, and he's going to race again. He was very recently a senator, so that's a vulnerable race as well. It's not, in other words, it is not totally out of the range of possibility for Democrats to win the Senate, but it would take a lot for Democrats to win the Senate. If Democrats were to actively take the Senate, they would probably also need to take Alaska, which is, again, a red state. Dan Sullivan is a popular senator there. So it seems pretty unlikely that the Republicans lose both the House and the Senate, but losing the House would be bad enough. If they lose the House, that's the end of major legislation from the Trump administration. It means endless investigations. It means that the House becomes a baton to wield against everything the Trump administration is trying to do on the executive level. So this requires us to look at what exactly is happening here. Why is President Trump lagging in the polls now? Why is he at 39%, 40%? How does he recover? So there is a brand new Reuters Ipsos poll that also shows, just like that NPR poll, that Trump is in the high 30s, that he's at 38%, which is the lowest rating he has had since he returned to power in January. What are the reasons for that? Well, it shows actually that the reason is not what people say that it is. So people have been saying that it's his foreign policy. That Trump's foreign policy is tearing apart the Republican Party. People do. It's his foreign policy. It's his policy in Ukraine and in the Middle East. And it's all of his focus on foreign policy that's destroying the party. Actually, wrong. The only, part of his policy right now that is wildly popular, at least by Trumpian standards, is his foreign policy. In fact, Trump's foreign policy, his approval ratings on foreign policy are better than any prior president of the modern era at this point in his term, which is kind of extraordinary. And for the amount of crap that he is currently taking in the very online spaces, guys, get out and touch grass. It turns out most Americans like the stuff that President Trump has been doing on foreign policy, or at least a plurality of Americans like it. And here's Harry Enton talking about the president's approval ratings on foreign policy.
You know, this is one of the areas in which Donald Trump is performing significantly better than he was in term one. One of his best issues relative to term one. What are we talking about? Approve of Trump on foreign policy at this point in term one. Look, Donald Trump was just at a 35% approval rating. up like a rocket. We're talking about 43% now. That's an 8-point rise. On the net approval rating, we're talking about a double-digit rise. The American people like much more of what they're seeing from Donald Trump in foreign policy in term 2 than they did in term number 1.
Okay, so, again, it ain't his foreign policy. It isn't immigration either. The president's net approval ratings on immigration have gone down, but that's largely because he has solved the immigration crisis in the United States. It turns out that Americans, they get a little bit more heartburn when it comes to deportation of people who are already in the United States. But the part that Trump already solved, which was the big Biden problem, was leaving that southern border wide open. Right? That was the part that Trump solved. And because he solved that, now that problem is off the table. So Americans aren't even thinking about the southern border. If they were thinking about the southern border in comparison to Biden, his approval ratings would be 80%. But we've now reached the point in the presidency where if you solve the problem, that no longer actually accrues to your benefit or redounds to your benefit. Actually, it kind of goes away just in the mind. Like, when's the last time you thought about the southern border? The answer is you don't, because Trump solved it. We'll get to more on the lagging polls for Republicans in a moment. First, in all the time I've been endorsing Pure Talk, my wireless company, I can honestly say I haven't seen an offer like this from them before. Listen to this. Unlimited talk, unlimited text, unlimited data with a 30-gig hotspot for just $29.95 a month for the rest of your life. Friends, this is Pure Talk's top-tier plan, normally $65 a month. Now through December 7th, just $29.95 a month. You're saving over 50% a month every month for life. Yes, that's on their crazy fast 5G network. This offer is extremely short-lived. Make the switch today, then tell all your friends. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro for Pure Talk's best unlimited plan for just $29.95 a month for life. And my Pure Talk coverage is excellent. Again, a lot of my life is on my phone. And if I don't have great coverage, it makes me very, very upset. So I do have great coverage from Pure Talk, and it costs me less money, and the company likes me. So that's a good thing. Make the switch in as little as 10 minutes. Keep your phone, keep your number, start saving with unlimited for life for just $29.95 a month. Again, that's puretalk.com/Shapiro to switch to my wireless company, Pure Talk. Taxes and fees not included. Some restrictions apply. See puretalk.com for details. Offer ends 12/7/25. Also, true self-reliance begins with taking control of your own health. Armra Colostrum harnesses nature's original blueprint for resilience. Packed with over 400 bioactive nutrients, colostrum fortifies your gut and strengthens your immune system from the cellular level up. When you invest in your health, you invest in your ability to show up fully, think clearly, and stay in control no matter what comes your way. Look, our bodies are under constant assault. Toxins, processed foods, relentless stress. Your gut is your first line of defense. Most supplements only address part of the problem. Armra Colostrum is different. This isn't just another supplement. It's a bioactive whole food, a pure concentrate of bovine colostrum that's sustainably sourced with a commitment to calf-first sourcing. It's packed with over 400 bioactive nutrients that fortify your entire gut wall system, not just one piece. This means balanced and strengthened immune health, better digestion, less bloating, support for healthy metabolism, and fat burning from the inside out. Elite athletes have been using colostrum for years because it enhances nutrient absorption, builds lean muscle, and speeds recovery. But the benefits go deeper. Cellular level support for hair, skin, energy, everything. This isn't processed or manipulated. It's pure, potent, and natural. Your body's blueprint for rebuilding itself the way it was designed to function. 4 daily servings, infinite benefits. We've worked out a special offer for my audience. Receive 30% off your first subscription order. Go to armra.com/Shapiro or enter Shapiro to get 30% off your first subscription order. That's armra.com/Shapiro. Okay, on the economy, he is 24 points underwater, or at least he slid 24 points since February of 2025. On the cost of living, he has slid to negative 39. That's his net approval rating since returning to office on cost of living. And he's getting shellacked, at least a little bit, on the Epstein files. 59% of Americans do not approve of his handling of the Epstein files. Among Republicans, 44% approve, 31% disapprove, 25% don't know. Among Democrats, of course, it's 88-6 because Democrats hate everything that he does. So if you had to put your finger on the two things that are sort of dragging Trump down in the approval ratings, it would be economic issues, which of course is true for every president. And yes, the Epstein stuff. Why the Epstein stuff? Well, Democrats were always going to disapprove of Trump on the Epstein stuff, of course, because Democrats disapprove of Trump on literally everything he does. The reason that Trump has dropped in his approval rating on the Epstein stuff is because you have actors who are trying to use the Epstein stuff as a club against the president in order to seize control of the MAGA movement. That's what's happening. Okay, Trump has not done anything radically different about Epstein than Joe Biden did, for example. In fact, he has been significantly more transparent than Joe Biden ever was. And I noticed that many of the big advocates on the Epstein matters are either directly implicated by the Epstein files themselves, like Steve Bannon, or are people who had no qualms about Epstein, weren't even talking about Epstein a year and a half ago. There were no major motions from Representative Thomas Massie to the Biden administration asking for the release of the Epstein files. In fact, the bill that just passed in the House and then in the Senate and the president signed, that bill, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, was only initiated in July of this year. Why? Well, because it turns out that you have a bunch of angry critics of the president's foreign policy who attempted to use the Epstein files as a way of undermining the president, period. That is what is happening. That doesn't mean people don't have open questions or that normie Americans aren't concerned. Of course, all of that's true. But the people who have elevated this to the top of the issue stack are people who, shall we say, do not like the president's policy decisions. That's what this is about. I mean, here was Thomas Massie yesterday, a guy who's apparently going to stake his entire congressional career on the Epstein files, talking about the Epstein files, again, endlessly.
These files implicate billionaires and friends of his and political donors that he's trying to protect. And Epstein also had close ties to our own intelligence agencies and Israel's intelligence agencies. That's why there's so much effort in trying to stop this.
Okay, he has provided no evidence that that is in fact the case, because no evidence has actually been provided by anyone that that is in fact the case. He's putting that out there because, again, he's very angry that the president decided to bomb the Fordo nuclear reactor in Iran. That's what this is. Marjorie Taylor Greene doing the same thing, seeing an opportunity to try and cause a rift with the administration over foreign policy and using Epstein as a club in order to do that. And Democrats are happy to jump in. Why do you think Abby Phillip is now massaging Marjorie Taylor Greene? You can tell who's getting the strange new respect these days. When you're on the same side as Abby Phillips with regard to the Epstein files, you might want to think about it a little bit.
I do think that this loyalty thing with Trump, if you've covered him as I have, you know it's a one-way street. But she literally is learning that
in real time.
Right now. Yes, literally yesterday, she said, I've been so loyal to him. Right. And they're calling me a traitor. I think she is realizing that Trump is not there for her.
Okay, so it's not about the loyalty thing. The Marjorie Taylor Greene feels betrayed. The reason that Marjorie Taylor Greene is pissed off is because she doesn't like his foreign policy, and she wanted to run for the Senate, and she was going to lose, and Trump told her he wasn't going to back a Senate run where she was going to lose. That's why she's pissed off. And so she's tried to turn this into a moment where she breaks the Republican Party. And yes, that is going to have some impact on Republican levels of support for the president. Also, when you have popular podcasters and voices who continue to malign the president without saying his name because they're cowards, who continue to go out there and say that the administration is covering up the Epstein files, the administration but without saying Trump's name, because they don't want to offend Trump. They're afraid that Trump will reach over like King Kong and just crush them. And so instead, they simply imply and imply and imply without just saying the thing they want to say out of pure, unbridled cowardice. It's pretty impressive. Meanwhile, Democrats, of course, are happy to jump on this bandwagon. Chuck Schumer was out there blasting President Trump on Epstein yesterday.
But I want to be very clear. The job is not done. The vote is not the end. It's only the beginning. Once the president signs the bill, he must apply and execute it faithfully. There must be no funny business from Donald Trump. He must not use the excuse of frivolous investigations to release some Epstein documents while intentionally hiding others that deserve to be seen by the American public. This is not an invitation for Donald Trump to pick and choose his version of the truth. This bill is a command for the president to be fully transparent, to come fully clean, and to provide full honesty to the American people, even if he doesn't want to. So I want to be clear. Anything less than full transparency will be unacceptable in the eyes of the American people. If Donald Trump refuses to comply, if he refuses to obey the law, Senate Democrats will hold him accountable.
I mean, I'm sorry. Senate Democrats are going to hold him accountable to what? Okay, the DOJ has policies and procedures. The law itself, the one that just passed, that Trump signed, allows exceptions for redaction for national security reasons and for legal reasons. So the bill was just a bunch of virtue signaling by people who don't like Trump. That's all it was. Meanwhile, people like Stacey Plaskett, it's amazing. This is a Democratic delegate from the Virgin Islands. And here she was. She had a relationship with Epstein, right? She was emailing with him. And she says she has no regrets at all on Jeffrey Epstein.
There are a lot of people who have done a lot of crimes, and as a prosecutor, you get information from people where you can. I've interviewed confidential informants. I've interviewed narcotics, drug traffickers, and others. And that doesn't mean that I'm their friend. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that they are friendly with me.
She had no idea. He's just another constituent who was a sex trafficker of the underage. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett, the brilliant congresswoman from Texas who would like to run for Senate herself. We'll see how that goes for her. It's a bold move, Cotton. Here she was with Caitlin Collins on CNN trying to suggest that Lee Zeldin had taken money from Jeffrey Epstein. There's only one problem. There's more than one Jeffrey Epstein in the country. And the person she's talking about is not, the Jeffrey Epstein.
You mentioned Lee Zeldin there. He's now a cabinet secretary. He responded and said it was actually Dr. Jeffrey Epstein, who's a doctor that doesn't have any relation to the convicted sex trafficker. Unfortunate for that doctor, but that is who donated to a prior campaign of his. Do you want to correct the record on the people that...
Listen, I never said that it was that Jeffrey Epstein, just so that people understand when you make a donation, your picture is not there. And because they decided to spring this on us in real time, I wanted the Republicans to think about what could potentially happen because I knew that they didn't even try to go through the FEC. So my team, what they did is they Googled, and that is specifically why I said a Jeffrey Epstein. Unlike Republicans, I at least don't go out and just tell lies. Because it was not the same one, that's fine. But when Lee Zeldin had something to say, all he had to say was it was a different Jeffrey Epstein. He admitted that he did receive donations from a Jeffrey Epstein, so at least I wasn't trying to mislead people.
Slow clap on that one. She wasn't trying to mislead people by saying that he took money from a Jeffrey Epstein. There's no implication that it was the Jeffrey Epstein. She was just putting out that the guy had the same name. Then what would your point be, madam? Literally, there would be no point. That's like saying that I found a 5'0" white guy named Michael Jordan and I defeated him in basketball. And then I went on Twitter the next day and I said, I just destroyed Michael Jordan in basketball. And when called upon it, I didn't say it was that Michael Jordan. I mean, then of what relevance would it be? Oh my God. This is our Congress. By the way, speaking of the insanity of our Congress, I have to say the tastes of the American people when it comes to our Congress people, undefeated. We make some interesting decisions. Representative Corey Mills of Florida is a disaster area. He's been a disaster area for quite a long time. Representative Nancy Mace is now planning to force a vote on censuring Corey Mills and removing him from several committees. Democrats had triggered a vote on Tuesday to censure Mills and kick him off the Armed Services Committee. And then they withdrew it because the GOP put forward a measure to censure Stacey Plaskett for her relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. So basically, there was a dirty deal where Republicans decided not to censure Mills and Democrats decided not to censure Plaskett. And they both should have been censured. I mean, Corey Mills his record is quite bad. And the measure is going to touch on a wide array of allegations against Corey Mills, including domestic abuse, stolen valor, and financial misconduct. Nancy Mace sent a letter to the speaker asking him to censure. Why? Well, because apparently, prior to serving in the U.S. House of Representatives, according to Representative Mace, Mills founded Paysum Solution International LLC and Paysum Defense LLC and acquired Amtech Corporation, companies which engage in security and military contracting with the U.S. government as well as the governments of foreign nations. Mills retains an ownership interest in those entities. In 2024, the Office of Congressional Conduct found that Paysum Defense ALS has been actively contracting with the federal government, securing close to $1 million in federal contracts for munitions and weapons distributed to prisons across the country. 94 of those contracts have been awarded to entities owned directly by Mills. Apparently, he may have entered into, held, or enjoyed contracts with federal agencies while a member of Congress. Also, apparently, Paysum Solutions does work with the U.S., Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, UAE, Australia, Kenya, Malaysia, and Kuwait. And he had tried to enter into contracts to sell munitions to foreign nations, including Saudi, Ukraine, and Colombia. Also, there are credible allegations that he misrepresented his military service and that he engaged in stolen valor. Also, there are many accusations that are currently floating around that he committed crimes against women with whom he had romantic relationships, including allegedly physically assaulting a woman and also allegedly threatening to release intimate photographs and videos of another. Now, why do I bring this up? Because if you don't want to lose congressional seats, you shouldn't run bad congressional candidates. Already coming up, our Congress is a mess. If Republicans wish to retain the Congress, they might need to dump a couple of pretty bad candidates. First, The holidays will be here before you know it, and for many families, that means excitement and a little stress. Between gifts, travel, higher prices, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, especially if you're already relying on credit cards to cover those basics. If that debt is piling up, you're not alone. If you're a homeowner, you might have considered reaching out to American Financing, but hesitated because you don't want to give up your low mortgage rate. Well, that's why American Financing created the Smart Equity Loan, a simple, smart way to get your finances back on track without giving up that low mortgage rate. Unlike a HELOC, which can fluctuate with the market, the Smart Equity Loan offers a fixed rate, so you'll have one predictable monthly payment. It lets you use your home's equity to pay off those high-interest debts, free up your cash flow, and still keep your existing mortgage intact. There are no upfront fees to find out if you qualify. Call American Financing today, 866-574-2500, or visit americanfinancing.net/Shapiro. Call American Financing today at 866-574-2500, or visit americanfinancing.net/Shapiro. NMLS 182334, NMLSconsumeraccess.org. Also, the holidays are here. If you're like me, you're juggling, decorating, shopping, hosting, everything. And you look at your windows and you realize, well, those blinds don't look particularly good. But who has time to deal with that right now? Well, that's where Blinds.com can help you out. They've completely flipped the script on window treatments. No more waiting around all day for somebody to come measure. No pushy salespeople, no hidden fees. The price you see is the price you pay. Here's what I love. You can do this however you want. DIY it yourself. Have professionals handle everything or something in between. You're in control. They've got hundreds of customizable styles. Their design experts are available on your schedule for free consultations. Need measurements? They'll send licensed, vetted pros to measure everything at no cost and then install for one low price. From blackout shades to motorized blinds to classic shutters, they've got you covered for every room and budget. It's all backed by their 100% satisfaction guarantee. The Black Friday deals at Blinds.com are going strong all month long, so don't miss your chance to save big. And as always, our listeners still get $50 off when you spend $500 or more. Just use code Shapiro at checkout. Limited time offer, rules and restrictions apply. See Blinds.com for details. Go check them out. That's Blinds.com. Here's Nancy Mace going after Mills yesterday.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows: censuring Representative Corey Mills of Florida and removing him from the Committee on Armed Services and the Committee on Foreign Affairs.
Okay, well, it turns out Democrats are salivating at the prospect of going up against Mills. According to the Orlando Sentinel, multiple Democratic candidates are now looking at his district, which is the Florida 7th District. That would be a vulnerable district. Normally it wouldn't be. That is a district that Mills in his last congressional election won, I believe, by 13 points. But historically, that has been a seat that has been held by Democrats before Mills. So if he's a bad candidate and if he's going to lose, it would certainly behoove him to get out of the way. And it would behoove Republicans to push him out of the way and get a better candidate in there so that they don't lose that seat. Meanwhile, turns out, again, Congress is filled with wonderful people. One of those wonderful people is apparently Congresswoman Sheila Sharfilis McCormick, another congressperson from Florida. So my state is doing yeoman's work in Congress these days. Apparently, the DOJ is charging her with stealing $5 million in FEMA funds, laundering the proceeds, and then using the money to support her 2021 congressional campaign. She faces up to 53 years in prison if convicted. According to the indictment, the DOJ says that Sharfilis McCormick, 46, and her brother, Edwin Sharfilis, 51, both of Miramar, worked through their family healthcare company on a FEMA-funded COVID-19 vaccination staffing contract in 2021. In July 2021, the company received an overpayment of $5 million in FEMA funds. Again, apparently they conspired to steal that $5 million, allegedly, and they routed it through multiple accounts to disguise its source. So we are only bringing the best. It's been a wonderful, wonderful day for Congress, which remains a repository of enormous amounts of stupidity. And meanwhile, in some positive news for the Trump administration. So we've talked about the Epstein of it. We've talked about the sort of drag effect on Republican approval ratings for President Trump. The biggest issue for the president, obviously, is the affordability issue, is the as always. If people do not feel secure about the economy, then they start to blame that on the president of the United States, no matter who the president is. That's just the way it works, whether it's fair or whether it's unfair. Okay, well, a couple of pieces of good news for the president. So the September jobs report, which was delayed for some 6 weeks, and we don't know if there will be an October jobs report at all or when it will come out. But apparently, the U.S. added 119,000 new jobs in September. That is above expectations of 53,000 jobs. The unemployment rate climbed, but that's because more people are joining the job market. So that's what happens. Sometimes you can have an increase in jobs, but the number of people who are now seeking a job has increased to outmatch that. That's what happened with the unemployment rate. So the question remains as to whether the Fed is going to cut the interest rates or not. If they believe that employment is slowing, they may in fact cut the interest rates. On the other hand, the stock market continues to churn along. So the Dow Jones Industrial Average today is likely to pop a little bit. That's because of the NVIDIA earnings report that went out yesterday. So NVIDIA has been just raking it in. And we've talked about some of the circular deals that are allowing for this to happen, in which NVIDIA buys stock in a private company like OpenAI, and OpenAI then takes that money and pumps it right back into NVIDIA chips, which pumps up NVIDIA's stock. So it's kind of a weird indirect version of a stock buyback in a way, kind of. Well, NVIDIA apparently continues to just sell and sell and sell and sell. According to the Wall Street Journal, NVIDIA reported record sales and strong guidance on Wednesday, helping soothe jitters about an artificial intelligence bubble that have reverberated in markets for the last week. Sales in the October quarter hit a record $57 billion. Holy moly. As demand for the company's advanced AI data center chips continued to surge, that's up 62% from 1 year early and exceeded the consensus estimates. The company increased its guidance for the current quarter. They estimate that sales this quarter are going to reach $65 billion. So in pre-market trading on Thursday, the stock was already jumping. Jensen Huang said, "We've entered the virtuous cycle of AI. AI is going everywhere, doing everything all at once." By the way, when we talk about skilled immigration, which we'll get to in a moment, Jensen Huang is like a pretty good indicator of why America, it's good to brain drain other countries and bring the best and brightest here. Jensen Huang is Taiwanese. He is here in the United States because his parents came here, and his company is now worth more than the entire economy of Germany. And it's based in the United States, creating an awful lot of wealth and jobs. So that is the good news. The good news is the employment market is churning along. More people are joining the lines to try and get a job again. The NVIDIA profits were big. On the other hand, there's still a lot of nervousness. And the nervousness is not misplaced. Number one, we don't have data on the October unemployment rate, so it's unclear exactly what the Federal Reserve is going to use for its guidance in terms of raising or lowering the interest rates or just keeping them the same. But meanwhile, Target is having trouble. So at the retail level, people are just buying less stuff, which suggests that all the extra money that people have, a lot of it is going into the upper end of the tech market, but some of it's not bleeding down into the sort of basic everyday staples. According to the Wall Street Journal, Target's plan to fix its continuing sales slump involves billions of dollars in investment. Apparently, incoming chief executive Michael Fidelki said the retailer would invest about $1 billion more next year to improve stores, its merchandise selection, and digital capabilities, bringing total new investment next year to $5 billion. That change will include store experience improvements and more exciting merchandise, along with better tech and e-commerce systems. In recent years, shoppers have been complaining of messy stores, items missing on shelves, and less exciting products. Well, I mean, I think there's truth to that. My family and I routinely shop at Target. I will say that it's gotten messier over the years. It used to be a lot cleaner of a store. It used to be better run. So there's truth to that. But the drop in profits, I don't think is entirely attributable to that. People might just be buying less because of the inflated price of things like groceries and basic staples, and now they're pulling back on their spending. This was the 12th consecutive quarter or week or falling sales for Target. The company said fewer shoppers visited its stores. Those who did spent less during the quarter. Comparable sales from those from stores and digital channels operating for at least a year fell 2.7% in the 3 months ended November 1st, according to the Wall Street Journal. He said that Fidelki, who's the CEO, he said that discretionary items like home decor and apparel are where they are really seeing a downturn, not particularly on groceries, but on the other sort of stuff. Target has already been cutting jobs. So are those stock market gains at the upper end of the market producing jobs in the same way? No, and that's not unusual. So, for example, in the aftermath of the dot-com bubble that burst in 2000 at the tail end of the Clinton administration, there was a fairly quick recovery in terms of the stock market under George W. Bush, but it took a little while for the jobs to come back. Because it turns out that when a bubble bursts, there tends to be consolidation. The consolidation increases the revenues and profit margins of companies, but it takes a while for that to bleed down into, I now want to hire additional people. Now, again, there is some good news for the Trump administration here in, for example, the price of groceries. As I've said before, one of the big problems the Trump administration has in terms of the affordability argument is that what people actually want is not a thing that the Trump administration probably is capable of delivering, and that is 2022 prices, 2020 prices, right? That very unlikely we're getting back to that level. So people in their own minds are not comparing what they paid for groceries this year to what they paid for groceries last year. If they were, That's kind of a small incremental increase or dead even. What they are doing is comparing the price of groceries this year to the price of groceries 4 years ago. And there, really, Biden did bake this into the cake. Once you have prices inflated by 10, 12, 15%, the only way the prices go back down 10, 12, 15% to what they were originally is a dramatic lack of demand. Because particularly with regard to groceries, a radical increase in supply very often is not possible. With that said, it is true, and the president has said this, that the inflation rates are down pretty dramatically from the Biden years. According to Axios, the average classic holiday feast for 10 will run $55.18 this Thanksgiving, per the American Farm Bureau's Federation new annual survey. That's about $5.52 per person, down 5% from last year. So that actually is a decline. However, as they say, 3 years of declines don't fully erase dramatic increases that led to a record cost of $64.05 in 2022. That estimate is based on turkey, sweet potato stuffing, and more. Cheaper turkey is driving a lot of the overall decline. So, again, the Trump administration has been handed a real bag when it comes to inflation and affordability, and then been told to solve it. It ain't quite that easy. Now, when it comes to the matter of affordability, the big question for President Trump is what can he do about affordability? Well, there are two things he can do on immigration. One thing is he could take the unskilled immigrants who are here illegally, and he could deport a lot of them. This would presumably be less of a drain on public resources. It would also presumably increase wages at the bottom levels. Now, that comes along with the increased prices of the things that those wages are used for. However, the vice president has pointed out that it would take some pressure off of housing. That's probably true, at least in the short term. So that's one aspect of immigration. And then the other aspect is you do need to bring in skilled immigrants. I know this has somehow become a very, very controversial matter on the political right. There's a big debate over H-1B visas. We've talked about the flaws in the H-1B visa program, which are quite real. People abusing it, people using it to bring in people who are sort of lower level tech people who could easily be Americans filling those jobs. But we do, in fact, need skilled immigrants coming into the country if you wish to make things more affordable. Because again, the only way to make things more affordable on a basic Econ 101 level is you increase supply and the demand stays the same, or you reduce the demand and the supply stays the same. That's the only way to reduce prices, because prices are a function of supply and demand. Those are the only two factors that are going into the prices. Now, there are a lot of things that go into the supply and the demand, everything from subsidies to regulation. However, if you wish for cheaper products, which is what affordability is, and again, I'm kind of amazed that we constantly hear this drumbeat from the right. All these Americans buying their cheap foreign products. Well, what if Americans just want, there's another word for Americans wanting to buy cheap products. It's called affordability, right? That's literally what that means. Doesn't have to be a foreign product, but it does have to be affordable. And if you wish for things to be affordable, then the inputs in making that thing also have to be cheaper and more plentiful. Okay, so the president has taken a lot of flack from members of his sort of heritage American right, shall we say, about his comments on skilled immigration. This is not the president in favor of mass migration. This is the president saying what is clearly and obviously true, which is that if you have a factory and you do not have people who are capable of staffing that factory in fruitful fashion, you can't just take somebody off the unemployment line and have them producing missiles tomorrow. You may need, at least temporarily, to bring in some foreign skilled labor in order to make that factory run. Otherwise, the factory gets outsourced and then Trump tariffs it, and now it's expensive for Americans. I mean, this is all very, very basic stuff, but the basic has now become controversial. Here is the president speaking at the U.S.-Saudi Investment Forum yesterday talking about skilled immigration.
You can't come in, open up a massive computer chip factory for billions and billions of dollars like is being done in Arizona and think you're going to hire people off an unemployment line to run it. They're going to have to bring thousands of people with them, and I'm going to welcome those people. I love my conservative friends. I love MAGA, but this is MAGA. And those people are going to teach our people how to make computer chips. And in a short period of time, our people are going to be doing great. And those people can go home where they probably always want to be.
Okay, so again, he is not wrong about this. He's taking an awful lot of flack for this. One of the things about President Trump is that the people who don't like Trump's policy very often wish cast his policy into something else. So isolationists will wish cast his policy into a sort of paleocon isolationism, which is not actually his policy. Or they'll wish cast his economic policy into some sort of economic autarky. That is not his actual policy. His policy is a mix of impulses, some of them that tend to be more paleocon in nature, like tariffs, and some of them that tend to be pretty free market based, like, for example, the free flow of skilled labor, which he tends to be more in favor of. But if you want affordability, one of the things the government can do to actually make things more affordable is, for example, allowing companies to bring in labor that is useful to them, at least on a temporary basis, in order to get the factories up and running, which will increase wages and keep jobs at home here in America. Preventing outsourcing, preventing higher wages and prices from being the result. Again, just supply and demand. Meanwhile, again, the president is cracking down on illegal immigration. Now, Zohran Mamdani in New York isn't. Zohran Mamdani is now vowing that he is going to prevent the NYPD from assisting ICE. Here was the new mayor. New York is going to get it good and hard. They deserve it. They voted for it. Here is Zohran Mamdani.
People are living in fear, and what we will ensure is the NYPD will be delivering public safety, not assisting ICE in their attempts to fulfill the administration's goal of creating the single largest deportation force in American history.
So that is his chief priority. Again, the things that Mamdani is doing right now, he's not going to get a lot of his economic plans done. Thank God for New Yorkers. But he is going to virtue signal a lot about illegal immigration. And so I hope that he enjoys the next time a Democrat is president and decides to reopen that southern border. And Greg Abbott or whoever the governor of Texas is starts shipping those illegal immigrants up to New York. I hope that he has fun with that. Here's Mamdani saying that he will tell Tom Homan that this city is an immigrant city.
Yeah, I will tell Tom Homan what I will tell anyone who asks, which is the fact that I am looking forward to representing the entirety of this city. And this city is also an immigrant city. It's a city that's proud of its immigrants' heritage. It's proud of the fact that so many from across the world find their home in this city. And we will protect those New Yorkers as we protect every New Yorker.
So, does he mean illegal immigrants? Because apparently he does. And meanwhile, all of this is leading to where is the state of the current economy? So the Trump administration believes that if they can keep the interest rates low, if those interest rates can drop even more, they can spur demand. If they can spur demand, then presumably they will increase demand for labor. People will have higher wages and all the rest. Okay, the problem is, again, we have an inflationary economy. We do. Okay, the inflation rates are still riding about 50% too high. I understand that we all got used to 10% inflation rates. But the reality is that the inflation rate is still riding somewhere between 2.8 and 3%. That is 50% higher than the Federal Reserve would want. It is 2.8% higher than I would want. I want the inflation rate to be zero. I think it's ridiculous that we gradually inflate the currency based on what I think is bad Chicago school economics theory. I'm more of a Vienna school guy. But put that aside. The president is angry at Chairman Powell over at the Federal Reserve for not lowering the interest rates even more than he has already done. Here he was yesterday.
The mortgage rates are down despite the Fed. Scott, you got to work on this guy. He's got some real mental problems. No, he's something wrong with him. It's just sweet. I'd be honest. I'd love to fire his ass. He should be fired. Guy's grossly incompetent.
Okay, but here is the thing. Putting all of America's failures or successes in the economy on the Federal Reserve is a mistake. It is a systemic mistake. The Federal Reserve is considering not cutting the rates. I would say that's the likelihood at this point. You have an economy that is overheated in terms of the stock market. Huge numbers pouring into the stock market. The stock market, again, it's jumping again today based on those NVIDIA earnings. The question is whether those circular deals are going to end up paying off in the end, whether it is a bubble or whether it's legit. You already have an employment market that does not seem to be cratering. It's kind of holding steady. So I guess the idea here would be that you have to lower the interest rates into an already hot market in order to keep the unemployment rate from spiking. But the unemployment rate is like 4.4%. There's not a historically high unemployment rate here in the United States. I do not think that this is the way that affordability happens, is by, again, more bubblish helicopter money. That does not seem like a great idea to me. Meanwhile, one of the ways that you could actually create affordability would be to stop with the bad left-wing policy. And one of the things I notice too often on the right is this belief in the free market goes away the minute that it is tested by any economic question at all. Right? The minute that the free market, literally the minute the free market produces a lag effect A bunch of people on the right jump off the bandwagon on the free market. Oh, no. This is when we need government policy. Government should step in and stop everything cold. This is when we need a new national socialism. Or maybe not. Maybe it turns out that bad policy remains bad and that the economy has hiccups all the time. And maybe it's true that the government turns those hiccups into full-blown cardiothoracic problems. Case in point, the Free Press has a good piece by Matt Miller talking about the ghost apartments in New York City. What he says is that strict limits on rent increases under 2019 laws in New York have left an estimated 50,000 apartments vacant across the city. Because the restrictions on what landlords can charge for these apartments often don't even cover the cost of maintaining them, they become ghosts. It's like they don't exist at all. Incoming New York Mayor Zohar Mamdani promised during his campaign to immediately freeze the rent for rent-stabilized apartments. But those rents have essentially been frozen since 2019. At the time, the laws were widely heralded as the strongest set of rent regulations anywhere in America. They were designed to protect tenants from supposed price gouging. But actually, what has happened is that sometimes tenants die. Sometimes tenants move. And if you can't raise the rent, well, then it actually costs you more money to keep the apartment lights on with a renter there than it would be to just leave the apartment totally empty. New York's rent laws rely on vacancy controls, which means rents don't reset between tenants. Right? So just because somebody leaves doesn't mean you can charge a new higher rent to the new tenant. The government instead assigns a maximum rent for every rent-stabilized apartment. That rent can't be meaningfully increased no matter how much money I have to spend on renovations. According to the authorities, the Rent Guidelines Board, the average cost to operate an apartment in a rent-stabilized Manhattan building built before 1974 was $1,560 a month, not including mortgage payments. Rounding for simplicity's sake, assuming $50,000 of renovations, that maximum legal rent on the apartment would only increase to about $1,230. After all the work was done, an apartment owner would still be upside down on that apartment. Because once again, it turns out the government policy usually achieves the reverse of the thing that it is attempting to achieve. Okay, meanwhile, the DOJ is running into some problems of its own. One of those problems apparently is basic competence. According to Politico, the Trump administration's criminal prosecution of former FBI Director James Comey is now in serious jeopardy. The federal judge overseeing the case questioned the validity of a grand jury indictment that charged Comey with lying to and obstructing Congress. U.S. District Judge Michael Nachmanoff pressed prosecutors during a hearing on the events around the charges against Comey. They questioned whether the entire grand jury even saw the actual 2-count indictment a magistrate judge received after grand jurors rejected one of the 3 charges proposed by the interim U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan. So apparently Halligan was called to the courtroom and he asked her to address the court. And it appears that actually the grand jurors were not present when the original indictment and a narrower substitute were presented to the magistrate judge. Halligan said that the 4-person and another grand jury were present, but not everybody in the grand jury. So that is an irregularity. Typically, the grand jury has to see the charges. Assistant U.S. Attorney Tyler Lemons suggested the replacement indictment was a necessity because the grand jury had turned down one of the proposed charges. Quote, they really had no other way to return it. So a lawyer for Comey said there's no indictment. So the procedural misstep was tantamount to a complete bar to prosecution. So at the very least, the government provided problems for itself. Maybe it's a procedural problem, but basic competence would be a good thing. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi has been talking about the possibility of a new Epstein investigation, which of course will quiet zero of the critics because it will come to the same conclusions as, the old Epstein investigation. But it'll allow Pam Bondi, I suppose, to kick the can down the road. She has handled this about as poorly as any AG has handled any issue that I've ever seen. Here is the Attorney General yesterday.
What changed since then that you launched this investigation?
Information that has come for information. There's information new information, additional information. And again, we will continue to follow the law, to investigate any leads. If there are any victims, we encourage all victims to come forward. And we will continue to provide maximum transparency under the law.
Okay, so again, a new investigation will please pretty much no one and also drag this thing out for several more months. So well done once again to the Attorney General Pam Bondi. Again, everything from her Epstein binders to the original announcement that there would be no additional charges brought with regard to people related to the Epstein case. announcements that there was no foreign intelligence intervention. All of that was handled about as badly as you can handle it. And apparently she is going to keep that pattern going. So well done there. Meanwhile, in positive DOJ news, I mean, positive only in the sense that the DOJ is doing its job. Apparently, a New Jersey man whose lengthy prison sentence for fraud convictions was commuted by President Trump in 2021 is now headed back to federal prison for another fraud conviction. U.S. District Judge Michael Shipp, according to ABC News, handed down a 37-year sentence on Friday to one Eliyahu Eli Weinstein of Lakewood, also known as Mike Koenig. Apparently, he has to pay $44 million in restitution due immediately. He was convicted in March on charges he helped defraud dozens of investors out of $35 million. Apparently, according to prosecutors, Weinstein and others falsely promised investors access to deals involving scarce medical supplies, baby formula, and first aid kits destined for wartime Ukraine. This would be the third time he has been convicted in a New Jersey federal court for defrauding investors. The first case involved a real estate Ponzi scheme. The second stemmed from additional fraud he committed while on pretrial release. He caused losses of $230 million. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison. President Trump commuted his term to time served about 8 years into his sentence in 2021, just before leaving office. And right after he was released, he went back to doing this. He's now going back to jail. Put him in jail forever, man. Put him in jail and leave him to rot. Truly. What a scumbag. Just gross. Okay. Meanwhile, on the drama scene, I have to say that Olivia Nuzzi, man, that I don't know what's going on with that lady, but pretty wild. So Olivia Nuzzi, who has worked at a wide variety of outlets, she seems to have made a bad habit out of sleeping with the people that she covers. That would include, of course, RFK Jr. Right? She didn't sleep with RFK Jr. Apparently, she was just sexting him. But she has a long history, apparently, of attention seeking. Apparently, when she was a teenager, she did a Lady Gaga-esque track called Jailbait. An old MySpace page from 2009 shows her posing in a purple tank dress with thigh-high boots and a skinny headband with a revealing lace top and handcuffs. So that's great. So she, of course, was fired when she was from New York Times Magazine because she was sexting with RFK Jr., which is really quite awkward. And then it turns out that she has a more bizarre history as well. Apparently, when she was 21, she dated Keith Olbermann when he was 55, which, okay, man. Apparently, according to Ryan Lizza, who was her fiance, she also slept with ex-South Carolina Governor Mark Sanford, who was 65, while they were dating. So apparently they'd also traveled the Appalachian Trail, which was, as you recall, an excuse that Mark Sanford used for one of his other affairs, apparently. Olbermann had paid for Nuzzi to attend college, covered her rent, and outfitted her in luxury designs from Tom Ford, Hervé Leger, and Cartier. Sounds like some solid journalism. Sounds great. I'm glad that our journalistic crew is doing such a wonderful job day in and day out. She also has a brand new book titled American Canto that is coming out December 2nd. So there'll be a movie made out of that, that's for sure. I think the real story there is a story as old as time. Older men will do pretty much anything to sleep with younger women, no matter how crazy those younger women appear to be. But again, nothing new there. That is just the nature of the beast. Unfortunately, human beings are filled with sin. Joining me on the line is Mary Margaret Olohan. She, of course, is our Daily Wire White House correspondent covering events there day by day. Mary Margaret, good to see you.
Good to be here, Ben.
Okay, so let's talk about the latest in Epstein Gate mania that just continues day by day. I am a person who is highly irritated by this entire story because I don't think anything new is going to break. It seems as though all of it seems to have been spun up, or at least a large part of it is spun up by people who don't like the president's agenda. That seems to be the feeling at the White House as well. How does the White House plan to deal with sort of next steps in Epstein Gate scandal mania?
Yeah, I think a lot of people around here feel the same way you do, Ben. I think the vibe around the White House is that, A, the Democrats did not care about the Epstein files until recently, when they could become more of a political talking point. And at the same time, the president and his team have been saying over and over, this is a Democrat-led hoax, which has led a lot of people to say, wait, what? The Epstein files aren't exactly a hoax, but what the White House is telling me is that's the perception of how the Democrats are handling it. They're not actually interested in it because of the victims, according to the White House. They're interested in it in order to score political points. Now, the president did sign the Epstein bill last night. We're supposed to be seeing these files sometime within the next 30 days. But there's a couple things to note here. One is that we're not going to see everything. There's going to be a lot of stuff redacted, whether that's to protect the identity of some of these young female victims, whether that is related to what the DOJ says, something along the lines of death. If they're too related to death, we might not know about it. I'm assuming that means Jeffrey Epstein's death. A couple different factors there. And so what the White House knows, and I think what all of us know at this point, is that there are going to be people who are not satisfied with the release of these files. There are always going to be people that are saying that the DOJ, that the Trump administration, that future administrations are covering things up. They're purposefully not revealing the full truth about the Epstein files. And so that's definitely an anxiety in and of itself. No one is going to be satisfied with the release of the files, and there's always going to be more questions that we want to answer. And so the White House is grappling with all of this, but in the meantime, their messaging is to lean into the revelations that we've learned about Democrats. They didn't want the files released, and then Democrats released some of them, and lo and behold, a whole bunch of Democrats are implicated in these releases themselves. So what the White House is doing is they're sending out messaging to reporters and to the public on some of these Democrats who are implicated, such as Larry Summers, such as Katie Couric, such as a whole other host of Democrats, such as Stacey Plaskett. And they're highlighting the relationships that these people had with Epstein, such as Stacey Plaskett texting with Epstein during a congressional hearing related to President Trump. I actually spoke with Donald Trump Jr., the president's son, and I asked him, do you think the Democrats are going to regret releasing these files? And he said yes, he thinks so. He thinks this is not going to play out well in their favor. And the more we learn, the more these Democrats are probably going to be making some angry phone calls to their friends in the House of Representatives and saying, why did you put us in this situation? No one is winning.
Now, Mary Margaret, meanwhile, there's been some talk that Zoran Mamdani might be headed to the White House for a meeting with the president of the United States. What have you been hearing about that?
Yeah, so he's coming tomorrow, and I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping that he was coming today. I'll be in the White House press pool today, which means that if there is an open press event in the Oval Office, I get to go in there and hopefully ask the president some questions. But he'll be coming here tomorrow, and he'll be meeting with the president, who announced that he was coming in a rather unusual Truth Social post where he called Zoran a communist and said that he asked to come to the White House on Friday. So that's going to happen. Obviously, this is going to be some great television if the press is allowed into that meeting. I heard one person say that we haven't seen a little moment like this since the Zelensky-Trump-Vance moment in the Oval Office. And Zoran is very interested in press himself. He's very good at it. He's gotten a lot of national attention, global attention, and the president is aware of this. And, he says he wants to make sure that New York City is a good place. Zoran allegedly does as well. And so that'll be a very fun meeting to tune into as we prepare to head to our Thanksgiving holidays.
Well, that is going to be some spicy stuff. And, hopefully it'll help get that turkey digested. Mary Margaret, thanks so much for the time. And thanks for the coverage as always.
Thank you, Ben.
Alrighty, folks. Coming up, we'll jump into that vaunted Ben Shapiro Show mailbag. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you are not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.